Hello everyone. Today we will study postmodernism, one of the important political traditions in UGC NET Political Science. In the UGC NET syllabus, postmodernism is placed in Unit 1, Political Theory, along with liberalism, conservatism, socialism, Marxism, feminism, ecologism, and multiculturalism. Postmodernism is slightly different from other ideologies. Liberalism gives importance to individual liberty. Marxism gives importance to class struggle. Feminism gives importance to gender justice. But postmodernism does not offer one fixed political program. Instead, it questions the very foundations on which political theories are built. So, the central question of postmodernism is, can any theory claim to give universal truth for all societies, all cultures, and all people? Postmodernists answer, no, do. Meaning of postmodernism. Postmodernism can be understood as a reaction against modernity and modernism. Modernity believed in reason, science, progress, objective truth, universal knowledge, and rational planning. It believed that human beings can use reason and science to create a better society. Postmodernism challenges this confidence. It argues that what we call truth is often not neutral. Truth is shaped by language, power, culture, institutions, and historical context. In simple words, postmodernism argues that there is no single universal truth. There are multiple truths, multiple realities, and multiple interpretations. Postmodernism rejects the idea that one theory can explain everything. It is skeptical of explanations that claim to be valid for all groups, cultures, traditions, races, or societies. 3. Postmodernism as a reaction against modernity. To understand postmodernism, we must first understand modernity. Modernity emerged with the Enlightenment. It was based on faith in reason, science, progress, and universal values. Modern thinkers believed that human society could be improved through rational knowledge. For example, liberalism believed that reason and rights can create freedom. Marxism believed that scientific socialism can explain history and transform society. Modern nationalism believed that the nation-state can create collective identity and progress. Postmodernism says that these theories are too confident. They claim to speak for everyone, but often they silence many voices. So postmodernism asks, who decides what is true? Who decides what is rational? Who benefits from a particular truth? Whose voice is excluded? This is why postmodernism is critical of universalism, objectivity, and grand theories. 4. Modernism versus postmodernism. Let us compare modernism and postmodernism. Modernism, postmodernism, believes in objective knowledge, believes knowledge is subjective, supports universal truth, supports multiple truths, believes in science and reason, questions the authority of science and reason, supports meta-narratives, supports local narratives, foundationalist, anti-foundationalist, believes in progress, questions the idea of automatic progress, seeks unity, emphasizes diversity and difference. In exam language, remember, modernism seeks reason, science, universalism, objective truth. Postmodernism seeks difference, plurality, local narratives, anti-foundationalism. The UGC NET material also presents postmodernism as a late 20th century reaction against modernity, emphasizing multiple truths, multiple realities, and rejection of meta-narratives. 5. Jean-François Lyotard and meta-narratives. The most famous definition of postmodernism was given by Jean-François Lyotard. Lyotard described postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives. This is a very important exam phrase. Now, what is a meta-narrative? A meta-narrative means a grand theory or grand story that claims to explain everything. For example, history is the story of progress through reason, or all history is class struggle, or science will solve all human problems. Postmodernists are suspicious of such grand theories. They argue that meta-narratives often hide domination. They present one viewpoint as universal truth and marginalize other viewpoints. So Lyotard supports local narratives instead of grand narratives. Local narratives are small, context-based, plural, and open to difference. The exam-oriented material associates Lyotard with the postmodern condition, a report on knowledge, and the phrase incredulity towards meta-narratives. For UGC NET, Lyotard in turn turns incredulity towards meta-narratives. Book encounters the postmodern condition, a report on knowledge. 6. Anti-foundationalism. Another important feature of postmodernism is anti-foundationalism. Foundationalism means the belief that knowledge can be built on a certain objective, universal foundation. For example, some theories say reason is the foundation of truth. Some say religion is the foundation of morality. Some say science is the foundation of knowledge. Postmodernism rejects this. It says there is no final foundation of truth. Postmodernists argue that truth is always interpreted through language, culture, discourse, and power relations. So postmodernism does not ask, what is the final truth? It asks, how was this truth produced? Who produced it? Who benefits from it? Who is excluded by it? This is why postmodernism is called anti-foundationalist. 7. Truth, knowledge, and power. Postmodernism does not treat knowledge as neutral. It says knowledge is deeply connected with power. In modern thought, knowledge is usually seen as objective and independent. But postmodernists argue that knowledge is produced within institutions such as schools, universities, prisons, hospitals, courts, media, and the state. This means that knowledge is not just discovered, it is also constructed. For example, when society defines someone as normal or abnormal, civilized or uncivilized, legal or criminal, these categories are not innocent. They are connected with power. This point becomes especially important in the thought of Michel Foucault. 8. Michel Foucault, Discourse and Power Knowledge. Michel Foucault is one of the most important postmodern and post-structural thinkers. Foucault rejected the Enlightenment idea that the human self is completely independent and rational. He studied how knowledge systems create categories of normality, madness, sexuality, crime, punishment, and discipline. His important concept is discourse. Discourse means a system of knowledge, language, and practices that defines what can be accepted as truth in a particular society. For Foucault, truth is not simply discovered. Truth is constructed through discourse. He argues that every age has its own dominant discourse. The discourse accepted by the majority becomes dominant and begins to shape social reality. Foucault also gives a postmodern theory of power. He says power is not only located in the state, police, army, or law. Power exists everywhere. It operates through schools, hospitals, prisons, offices, clinics, welfare institutions, and everyday norms. His approach gives a micro view of power, showing that each person can be both powerful and powerless at the same time. For UGC NET, Foucault draws discourse, power knowledge, disciplinary power, governmentality, biopower, important works, Madness and Civilization, The Birth of the Clinic, Discipline and Punish, The History of Sexuality. 9. Jacques Derrida and Deconstruction. Now we come to Jacques Derrida. Derrida is associated with the concept of deconstruction. Deconstruction is a method of reading and interpretation. It argues that a text does not have only one fixed meaning. A text may have multiple meanings. Derrida challenges the binary oppositions of Western thought, such as male, female, civilized, uncivilized reason, emotion, good, bad center, margin, speech, writing. West-East postmodernism argues that these binaries are not neutral. One side is usually treated as superior and the other as inferior. For example, reason is often treated as superior to emotion, male as superior to female, West as superior to East. Deconstruction exposes these hidden hierarchies. So, deconstruction does not simply destroy meaning. It shows that meaning is unstable, contested, and open to interpretation. UGC NET material associates Derrida's deconstruction with of grammatology and the rejection of fixed textual meaning. For UGC NET, Derrida, one deconstruction book nerds of grammatology, 10. Friedrich Nietzsche as a precursor. Friedrich Nietzsche is often treated as a major precursor of postmodernism. Nietzsche rejected traditional morality, universal truth, and fixed foundations of knowledge. He famously declared God is dead, meaning that traditional religious and moral foundations had lost their authority in modern society. He also gave the concept of will to power. For Nietzsche, truth is not purely objective. It is often connected with the power to interpret and define reality. UGC NET material often presents Nietzsche as the father of postmodernism and associates him with will to power and Superman. For example, Nietzsche, will to power, Superman, God is dead works. Beyond good and evil, on the genealogy of morals, thus spoke Zarathustra 11. Jean Baudrillard, Hyperreality and Simulation. Another important thinker is Jean Baudrillard. Baudrillard argues that in postmodern society, reality and representation become mixed. He gives the concept of hyperreality. Hyperreality means a situation where images, symbols, media, advertisements, and simulations become more powerful than reality itself. For example, people may know a political leader more through television images, social media posts, and advertisements than through actual political work. In such a situation, representation becomes more important than reality. Baudrillard also uses the terms simulation and simulacra. Simulation means imitation or representation. Simulacra means copies without an original, or signs that no longer refer to a stable reality. UGC NET material associates Baudrillard with hyperreality, symbolic exchange, simulation, and simulacra. For UGC NET, Baudrillard, so hyperreality, simulation, simulacra works, simulacra and simulation, symbolic exchange and death. 12. Gilles Deleuze and productive difference. Gilles Deleuze is associated with the idea of difference. Modern philosophy often tries to remove difference and reach unity. Hegelian dialectics, for example, tries to overcome contradiction through synthesis. Postmodernism values difference. Deleuze argues that difference is not merely a problem to be solved. Difference is productive. It creates new possibilities, new identities, and new ways of thinking. So, postmodernism does not search for one final unity. It supports plurality, openness, and multiplicity. UGC NET material links Deleuze with productive difference and difference and repetition. For example, Deleuze and difference and repetition, productive difference 13, Richard Rorty, and pragmatism. Richard Rorty is another important postmodern thinker. Rorty criticizes the idea that philosophy can mirror objective reality. He argues that philosophy should not search for final foundations. Instead, philosophy should be understood as conversation, discourse, and interpretation. He rejects the assumption that there is one objective truth waiting to be discovered. For UGC NET, Rorty asserts anti-foundationalism, philosophy as discourse works, philosophy and the mirror of nature, contingency, irony, and solidarity. 14. Martin Heidegger and existential phenomenology. Martin Heidegger is also important as a background thinker for postmodernism. Heidegger questioned the technological and rationalist worldview of modern society. He argued that modern technology reduces the world to an object of control. He is associated with existential phenomenology and the idea that human beings do not simply discover truth from outside, they experience and interpret the world from within their existence. UGC NET material associates Heidegger with being and time. For example, Heidegger, Existential Phenomenology, book, Being and Time. 15. Characteristics of postmodernism. Now let us summarize the main characteristics. First, postmodernism rejects absolute truth. Second, it rejects objective reality as a single, final reality. Third, it rejects meta-narratives or grand theories. Fourth, it is anti-foundationalist. Fifth, it gives importance to language, discourse, interpretation, and meaning. Sixth, it emphasizes difference, plurality, diversity, and fragmentation. Seventh, it challenges the authority of science, reason, and progress. Eighth, it supports the voices of marginalized groups, including women, minorities, colonized peoples, and other excluded identities. Ninth, it criticizes modern institutions such as bureaucracy, nationalism, capitalism, technology, and centralized power when they claim to represent universal progress. For the exam, remember, postmodernism, no universal truth, plus no objective reality, plus no grand narrative, plus discourse, plus deconstruction, plus difference, plus power knowledge. 16. Postmodernism and politics. Postmodernism changes the way we understand politics. Traditional political theory asks, what is justice? What is liberty? What is the ideal state? What is democracy? Postmodernism asks different questions. Who defines justice? Whose liberty is being protected? Which voices are excluded from the state? Who decides what democracy means? How does language create political reality? For example, liberalism may say that all citizens are equal, Postmodernism asks, are all citizens actually represented equally in political discourse? Are caste, gender, race, sexuality, religion, and ethnicity ignored in the name of abstract citizenship? Marxism may say class is the central contradiction. Postmodernism asks, can class explain everything? What about gender, caste, race, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, and culture? So postmodernism does not accept one single center of politics. It decentralizes politics. 17. Postmodernism and democracy. Postmodernism supports pluralism and difference. Therefore, it is often linked with radical democracy, discourse, debate, and recognition of marginalized identities. It argues that democracy should not merely mean elections. Democracy should also mean openness to multiple voices. So, postmodern democracy gives importance to participation, difference, dialogue, identity, local struggles, and resistance to domination. Postmodernists are suspicious of any authority that says, only we know the truth. 18. Postmodernism and the state. Postmodernism does not see the state as a neutral institution. It argues that the state produces categories. It defines citizens, criminals, migrants, minorities, normal people, abnormal people, legal subjects, illegal subjects, and so on. These categories are not merely administrative, they shape identity and power. For example, when the state classifies a group as backward, minority, tribal, criminal, refugee, or illegal, it is not only describing reality, it is also creating a political identity. So postmodernism studies the relationship between state, language, knowledge, and power. 19. Postmodernism in international relations. In international relations, postmodernism is often connected with post-structuralism. It challenges dominant theories such as realism and liberalism. Realism says international politics is mainly about power and security. Liberalism says international institutions and cooperation can create peace. Marxism says global capitalism and class exploitation are central. Postmodernism asks, who created these categories? What is meant by security? Who is called a terrorist and who is called a freedom fighter? Who defines civilized and uncivilized? How do powerful states create global narratives? In IR, postmodernism analyzes the relationship between knowledge and power. It uses deconstruction to question classical texts and dominant theories. The UGC NET material links postmodern, post-structural IR with Derrida, Lyotard, Richard Ashley, and James Derrida. For UGC NET, Postmodernism in IR, critique of dominant theories, plus deconstruction, plus knowledge power, plus anti-meta-narrative. 20. Difference between postmodernism and post-structuralism. These two terms are often used together, but they are not exactly the same. Postmodernism is a broad, cultural, philosophical, and political condition. It questions modernity, progress, universal truth, and grand narratives. Post-structuralism is more specifically a theoretical approach that questions fixed structures, fixed meanings, and stable identities. Thinkers like Derrida and Foucault are often called both postmodern and post-structural thinkers. For exam purposes, the overlap is important. But conceptually, postmodernism tends broad critique of modernity, post-structuralism tends critique of fixed structures and meanings. 21. Criticism of postmodernism. Postmodernism has been criticized from many sides. First, critics say it leads to relativism. If every truth is relative, then how can we criticize injustice, oppression, patriarchy, racism, or authoritarianism? Second, it may lead to nihilism. If there is no universal truth and no objective morality, people may conclude that nothing matters. Third, Marxists criticize postmodernism for ignoring material exploitation. They argue that capitalism, class inequality, and economic structures cannot be reduced only to discourse. Fourth, liberals criticize postmodernism because it weakens the universal basis of rights. If rights are only local narratives, then how can we defend universal human rights? Fifth, feminists are divided. Some feminists use postmodernism to criticize patriarchy and fixed gender identities, but others argue that if the category women is too fragmented, collective feminist politics becomes difficult. Sixth, critics argue that postmodernism sometimes uses difficult and obscure language, but despite these criticisms, postmodernism remains important because it forces us to question hidden power behind truth claims. 22. Relevance of postmodernism today. Postmodernism is relevant today because we live in a world of multiple narratives. Media, social media, advertising, political propaganda, identity politics, and digital culture constantly create competing versions of reality. Postmodernism helps us understand how truth is constructed, how media produces reality, how power works through knowledge, how identities are formed, how marginalized voices are silenced, and how universal claims may hide domination. It is especially useful in studying identity politics, feminism, post-colonialism, multiculturalism, media politics, surveillance, and discourse. 23. Important thinkers and concepts. For UGC NET, remember this table. Thinker key concept. Important work, Jean-François Lyotard, Incredulity towards Meta-narratives, The Postmodern Condition. Jacques Derrida, Deconstruction of Grammatology. Michel Foucault, Discourse, Power, Knowledge, Discipline, and Punish. History of Sexuality. Friedrich Nietzsche, Will to Power, Superman Beyond Good and Evil, Genealogy of Morals. Jean Baudrillard, Hyperreality, Simulation, Simulacra, and Simulation, Gilles Deleuze. Difference, Difference, and Repetition, Martin Heidegger, Existential Phenomenology, Being and Time. Richard Rorty, Anti-foundationalism, Philosophy as Discourse, Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature. The UGC NET material also gives a concise thinker key concept mapping. Foucault, Discourse, Derrida, Deconstruction, Nietzsche, Will to Power and Superman, Heidegger, Existential Phenomenology, and Baudrillard, Hyperreality, Symbolic Exchange, Simulation, and Simulacra. 24. Exam-oriented summary. Let us now revise the topic in exam language. Postmodernism emerged in the late 20th century as a reaction against modernity. It first emerged in art and literature and later entered philosophy, political theory, sociology, and international relations. It rejects the idea of single truth. It believes in multiple truths and multiple realities. It rejects objective reality. It rejects meta-narratives. Lyotard defined postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives. Postmodernism is anti-foundationalist. Derrida is associated with deconstruction. Foucault is associated with discourse and power knowledge. Baudrillard is associated with hyperreality, simulation, and simulacra. Nietzsche is treated as a major precursor of postmodernism. Deleuze is associated with difference and repetition. Postmodernism emphasizes difference, plurality, diversity, local narratives, and marginalized voices. It criticizes universalism, scientism, rationalism, bureaucracy, nationalism, and centralized power. In international relations, postmodernism questions dominant theories and studies how power constructs global knowledge. 25. To conclude, postmodernism is not a simple ideology like liberalism or Marxism. It is a critical way of thinking. It teaches us not to accept any theory blindly. It asks us to question every universal claim. It reminds us that truth is often connected with power. The central message of postmodernism is there is no single final truth. There are many truths, many voices, many identities, and many interpretations. For UGC NET, always remember the formula: postmodernism, critique of modernity, plus rejection of meta-narratives, plus anti-foundationalism, plus deconstruction, plus discourse, plus power knowledge, plus plurality of truths.